The following is some of Englewood's exclusive history. As long as 12,000 years ago, Native American tribes, Calusas, lived throughout southwest Florida, including Englewood. Human skeletons, animal bones, spears, and Indian mounds have been found throughout the area. With the discovery of this continent by the Europeans in the late 1400s, exploration slowly brought more visitors. Hernando de Soto, Ponce de Leon, Panfilo Narvaez, and others explored Florida in search of gold. They found little, but paved the way for others to come. Next, Cuban, Bahamian, and Spanish fishermen came to fish the fertile waters of the Gulf of Mexico, inlets and bays, including Lemon Bay. After 2.5 centuries of Spanish rule, Florida became the 27th state in 1845. Carrie and Carl Bayer Seth settled here in 1894. Carl would eventually be known as the Bee Man because of the large bee business he and Carrie would develop. Carrie is given credit for actually starting the bee business. In about 1910, she caught a colony of wild bees. In time, she enlarged it to several colonies and proceeded to sell honey. Carl was quick to pick up on the success of the honey. He developed several bee yards, or apiaries, and went into the bee business full-time. He also opened a retail store in Sarasota where he sold all the supplies for raising bees. In just a few years, Carl acquired a statewide reputation in Florida's huge bee industry and even became the state bee inspector.
In 1896, the original plat for the town of Englewood was recorded by the three Nichols brothers. They had purchased almost 2,000 acres bordering on Lemon Bay and had grandiose ideas for a planned community they named for their hometown outside of Chicago. Englewood was to be a thriving Florida Grovetown. The Nichols brothers aimed for a lemon-growing area since lemons were in high demand for treating scurvy and influenza, both serious health threats at the time. Lemons then were very costly because they had to be imported mostly from Spain, so the Nichols saw good profit in their production. The entrepreneur's game plan was to sell residential acreage on which to build homes for $30 an acre. But the buyer had to agree to also buy another 10 acres of grove land on which to grow lemons. Everyone was to make money, the Nichols brothers on their real estate sales, the buyers on the lemons they would produce. Many small citrus trees were actually planted in the area. Everyone agreed it was a grand scheme except Mother Nature. Severe back-to-back freezes killed all the immature lemon trees that had been planted. The lowest temperature recorded was 14 degrees.
With the failure of the groves, the Nichols brothers quickly changed their plans and started promoting Englewood as a resort area featuring excellent hunting, fishing, and water activities. Englewood became one of the first winter resort spots in Florida. The Nichols built a beautiful upscale hotel, complete with a ballroom overlooking Lemon Bay, catering to wealthy and adventurous tourists. Several well-known people of the day came to visit, but the success was short-lived. The Englewood Inn burned to the ground in 1909. That left no place of proper elegance for the kind of visitors the Nichols brothers had been attracting. Besides, getting to Englewood was extremely difficult. As train lines became more common in Florida, it was easier to go somewhere else. After all, these early tourists were the kind of people who had their own railroad cars. So ended the Nichols brothers' dreams of a grove town and then a wealthy northern tourist trade for Englewood. The only citrus legacies the area has been left with are the two beautiful names, Lemon Bay and Grove City.
Dearborn Street gained its name when the Nichols brothers of Englewood, Illinois, platted the new town of Englewood, Florida in 1896. The street was based on a trail worn by Englewood's first known white settler family, William and Mary Goff. The Goff family moved to the shore of Lemon Bay in 1878 and lived in a tent before building a log cabin. Their 60 acres provided an isolated home site. The nearest neighbors were in the regions of present-day Nokomis, Punta Gorda, and Boca Grande. The trail, worn by their travel by horseback, then horse and wagon, became the southernmost street named in the new town, Dearborn Street.
Born in Plymouth, Florida in 1871, Peter E. Buchan arrived in Englewood in 1902. Peter first worked as a bookkeeper for the Chadwick Fish Company. He married Florence Jerome in 1904. In 1908, he worked at the town's only store, owned by the Nichols brothers who founded Englewood. When business came to a standstill, Peter left the area but returned in 1912. As soon as Peter entered the store on Yale Street, Nichols exclaimed, "Hi, have you come back to buy the store?" It was an offer Peter couldn't refuse. He got the business and the entire inventory for $315. Since the sale did not include the building, the Yale Street land on which it sat, or the adjacent dock, the Buckins also had to pay an additional $10 monthly rental fee. Not wanting to pay the monthly rental, Peter Buckin purchased a parcel of land on the corner of Dearborn Street and Olive Street, later known as Old Englewood Road, for $100 in 1913. The Buckins built a large, two-story building with a store and a post office on the first floor and the family's living quarters above. They also built a dock that extended 250 feet into Lemon Bay. Since there were still no roads connecting Englewood with other communities, the entire store's merchandise arrived by sailboat. Almost immediately, the property became known as Buckin's Landing. Some thought it risky business for Buckin to move his store several long blocks away from Yale Street, which was then the commercial center of the tiny town. Other merchants soon followed his lead, however, and Dearborn Street became the new commercial center of Englewood. During the heyday of land speculation in the 1920s, a development of 98 acres was planned for west of today's Old Englewood Road, right where Buckin Airport is today. Designed as a mecca for vacationing stars and the wealthy, it was to be called Hygea. Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford planned to build their 30-room home here. Close on the heels of the announcement that a half score of producers, managers, actors, newspapermen, and authors had purchased lots in Hygea, the latest development in Englewood, is the news that Mr. and Mrs. Douglas Fairbanks have also made purchases here. When the Great Florida Land Boom suddenly ended, Hygea was all but forgotten. The land sat unused for many years.
In the late 1920s, the Florida land boom was over, and the stock market had crashed. There wasn't much money left in Englewood's only bank, but the cashier, Abner Silkey, helped himself to it and left town.
When the construction of the Tamiami Trail began in 1923, all towns along the way wanted to be included on its route from Tampa to Miami. Englewood was no exception. In 1925, the town incorporated. With incorporation of 13 square miles, Englewood became the second largest town in acreage in Sarasota County, thereby strengthening its case for the trail to be routed through the town. As originally designed, the Tamiami Trail entered Englewood on Olive Street, turned east on Dearborn Street, and exited via River Road. As part of the celebration to mark the opening of the trail, the Governor's Motor Arcade paused in Englewood on April 25, 1928. Speeches were given on the front porch of Ziegler's store on Dearborn Street. Although the route was revised to omit Englewood in the 1930s, Dearborn Street remained the commercial center of the historic Englewood community. It was the location of many firsts for the town, including newspaper, medical doctor, dentist, bakery, 5 and 10 cent store, barber, modern bank, drugstore, auto garage, flower shop, shoe store, funeral home, appliance store, and community theater.
The Chadwick family settled in Englewood at the turn of the last century. They ran a very successful fish business in Englewood and Punta Gorda. Over the years, they acquired a large amount of land on Manasota Key. In 1926, they started developing their property, which was called the Chadwick Beach Subdivision. Located opposite Englewood's public beach, the first building at this location was known as the Chadwick Pavilion. The pavilion housed dressing rooms and showers. You could also buy gasoline, kerosene, and groceries. Dances were held on weekends. It was also known as the Punta Gorda Beach Pavilion. They ran a very successful fish business in Englewood and Punta Gorda. The Chadwicks got hit by the collapse of the Florida land boom and ownership passed to Lew Woods. The pavilion then became known as the Lew Woods Casino. Lou had his carnival friends visit, and it became a real hotspot with gambling, drinking, and dancing. He also supplied fishermen with bait and tackle. In 1945, it burned to the ground, but Lou built on the same spot the three-story structure that stands today. He added a restaurant and bar and planned to build a dance floor on the second floor and rooms to rent on the top floor. But Lou Woods never lived to see its completion. In 1958, the building was bought by Clayton E. Kesselring, who added boat docks, a snack bar, and built an apartment on the second floor. At first, he named it the White Elephant, but soon changed the name to the Captain's Club. The third floor remained unfinished. Today's owner changed the name back to the White Elephant and has plans to finally complete the top floor. This historic building is one of Englewood's true landmarks.
In 1912, local resident Peter Buchan was hired as caretaker of the Lemon Bay Trading Company. At the same time, he was also appointed Englewood postmaster. By 1916, Buchan built his own store at the intersection of Dearborn and Olive Streets on Lemon Bay. Buchan then moved the post office to the new store and remained postmaster until 1921, when he gave up this position to his wife Florence. During the years Florence Buchan was postmaster, business seemed to slow down. "On a good day we sold stamps for about 6 letters," said Buchan. Postal authorities noticed the situation and threatened to close down the Englewood branch. Local residents organized and began mailing grapefruits to each other to increase the volume of mail. This plan seemed to succeed, and the Englewood post office continued to operate. In 1928, the post office was moved from Buchan's Landing to Ziegler's General and Hardware Store on Dearborn Street. Mary Green was appointed new postmaster that year, and in 1929 totaled $1,200 in postal receipts at the Ziegler store location. Because of this increase, postal authorities raised Englewood to a third-class operation. The post office remained at the Ziegler store until 1946, when an Army surplus barracks building was moved from Buchan Field to the corner of Dearborn and Elm Streets. This structure was converted into a post office, and for the first time, Englewood had a post office housed in its own building. There was no mail delivery at this time, so the new building housed over 400 boxes for people to come in and pick up their mail. In 1951, postal receipts climbed to over $8,000 a year. By 1959, the Englewood post office on Elm Street definitely needed more space. It was at this time a new location was found in the former Sears store on Dearborn Street, across from the old hardware store. The old location on Elm Street was torn down. In 1961, Florence Johnson was appointed postmaster and remained in this position until her retirement in 1980. Johnson was responsible for modernizing Englewood's post office operations. By 1962, the Englewood branch had collected over $56,000 in receipts and was finally designated a first-class operation. Florence initiated Englewood's first home delivery and even formulated the routes that carriers would take. One big problem for mail delivery was the lack of street names and house numbers. Florence organized a very successful effort for residents to put up house numbers and for street signs to be put in place. By 1970, postal receipts at the Dearborn Street location had reached $200,000, and space was once again a problem. A large modern post office was built on River Road with plenty of room for parking. Englewood post office operations are still run from this location today. In April 1949, on the advice of Peter E. Buchan, Sarasota County purchased 93 acres of the Hygea land for an airport. The new mosquito eradication program planned to use the airport for aerial spraying in the southern part of the county. The county commissioners named the airport to honor Buchan's long and efficient service to the county. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the history.